My name is Maya, I'm 27, and even now, my hands shake a little when I think about how everything collapsed in a single night. I'd spent years convincing myself I was fine, that quiet was the same as peace, that shrinking myself was easier than fighting. But nothing prepared me for the moment he turned off the TV, looked at me like I was nothing, and told me to get out. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just went silent, and that silence almost destroyed me. Because the next day, a man showed up at the door, and that was when I learned the truth. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. Now, let me take you back to how this all began. I remember the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the kind of background noise you only notice when everything else in your life suddenly stops. That night, it felt like the world had gone still. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, hugging my knees without even realizing it, my eyes half focused on the flashing colors of whatever show he decided to put on. It had been a long day at work, and all I wanted was a moment of quiet. Real quiet. Not the kind that comes from holding my breath around someone who expects you to read their moods like a weather report. He was slouched on the other end of the couch, scrolling his phone, barely watching the TV, barely acknowledging I existed. That wasn't new. What was new was the sudden sharp click when he grabbed the remote and shut the TV off completely. The room fell into darkness except for the blue glow coming from his lock screen. I remember glancing at him, unsure if something was wrong. He didn't look angry, not at first. Just done. Like someone had erased the last bit of patience he had left. Then he said it. Get out. At first, I thought he meant spiritually, like get out of his space, stop hovering, stop breathing too loudly. But his voice was flat, final. He didn't point at the door, but he didn't have to. He didn't raise his tone, but he didn't need to. Those 3 words hit harder, because of how quiet they were. Like he'd rehearsed them. I remember looking at him with this awkward half-smile, waiting for the joke to land. It didn't. His eyes stayed glued to the doorway behind me, as if imagining me already gone. My stomach twisted, but I didn't say anything. Not a word. Silence felt like the safest answer. I'd learned that with him. Silence kept the peace. Silence made him calm. Silence meant I wasn't starting anything. So I stayed quiet. I didn't ask why. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even breathe too loudly. I just slowly stood up and walked into the bedroom, my legs barely holding me, my chest tight with something that felt like shame, fear, and disbelief tangled together. It wasn't the first time he'd told me to leave during an argument, but this wasn't an argument. There had been no trigger, no fight, no lead-up. Just a decision he seemed to have made on his own time, long before telling me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, wondering if this was really happening or if I was misreading everything. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't grab my things. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, trying to gather the courage to move, to think, to breathe. Eventually, I lay down fully dressed and stared at the ceiling until morning. He never came into the room, never checked on me, never softened. It was like I had already disappeared from his world. When sunlight finally seeped through the curtains, it didn't bring clarity. It brought nausea. My tongue felt dry, my head heavy. For a few minutes, I convinced myself that maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe he'd been stressed, maybe he didn't mean it, maybe it was a bad moment that would pass like all the others. But when I walked into the living room, he wasn't there. His keys were gone. His shoes gone. His jacket gone. He hadn't left a note or a message. The house felt abandoned, and I didn't know if he had left for work or left for good. I made coffee with shaking hands, spilling some on the counter. The mug felt too heavy, like it was made of iron. I took a sip anyway, needing something warm to hold on to. That's when the knock came. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't polite. It was sharp and urgent, like someone who didn't expect to be kept waiting. My heart kicked against my ribs. For a second, I thought he'd forgotten something and come back irritated. But when I opened the door, I froze. The man standing on the doorstep wasn't him. He was older, mid-40s maybe, with sharp eyes that scanned me instantly, as if taking inventory. His hands were shoved into the pockets of a dark jacket, and he leaned forward a little, squinting past me into the house. I hadn't even said hello yet. "Is he here?" the man asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm in a way that made my spine straighten. Something about him felt wrong, not dangerous exactly, but intense. Focused. Like he wasn't there for chit-chat. "No," I answered automatically. "When's he coming back?" I didn't know. I didn't know anything, really, not even where I stood in my own life at that moment. But the stranger's presence made the air feel colder. "I'm not sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man stared at me for a few seconds too long. Then he sighed, like he'd expected this answer, but hoped he was wrong. He pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper, creased and worn. He held it up like proof of something. "Tell him he needs to call me," he said. "Today. No more waiting." My stomach tightened. About what? He looked at me then, really looked, and something shifted in his face. Confusion? Realization? Maybe even concern. "You don't know," he said quietly. I shook my head. He studied me for another second, then pocketed the paper again. "Just tell him I came by." But he didn't leave. Not immediately. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the empty street, then back at me. "You should also be careful," he murmured. The words hit me harder than the knock on the door. My pulse jumped into my throat. "Careful of what?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he lowered his voice and said, "Sometimes people drag others into things without telling them. You understand." I didn't understand. Not fully. But fear made the edges sharp enough. Before I could ask more, he stepped back, nodded once, and walked away without another word. I closed the door slowly, my fingers trembling on the handle. The house felt colder than before, like someone had left a window open and a storm was rolling in. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding as I replayed every second of the conversation. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing with crushing clarity. Silence wasn't going to protect me anymore. I walked into the living room, staring at the couch where he'd told me to get out. The quiet that once felt like safety now felt like a threat. My coffee had gone cold on the table, untouched. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how alone I was, and how much I didn't know. I tried calling him. No answer. I tried texting. Delivered, but no reply. By noon, the anxiety in my chest had grown into something heavier, something that made it hard to breathe evenly. I kept pacing, replaying every red flag I had ignored over the years. The nights he came home late, the calls he wouldn't take in front of me, the sudden money problems he brushed off, the random people he insisted were just acquaintances. I had always told myself I didn't want drama, that giving him space was healthier than asking questions. But now those excuses felt like traps I had willingly walked into. Around 3 p.m., I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, staring at nothing, when a thought hit me so loud it felt like someone had spoken it out loud. What if he wasn't in trouble? What if I was? The stranger's warning echoed inside me, growing sharper by the hour. My hands felt cold, my mind restless. I wanted answers, but I didn't know where to start. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't even know what questions to ask. But I knew this. I couldn't sit in silence anymore. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and took a long breath. The first step wasn't clear, but I knew I had to start moving. Staying still felt dangerous. And so, for the first time since he told me to get out, I took action. I unlocked his desk drawer. Knowing I was crossing a line he had once warned me never to cross. He'd said it casually at the time, leaning against the doorway with that half-smirk he wore whenever he wanted to look like he wasn't being controlling. "Don't go through my things, Maya. It's just a respect thing." Back then, I nodded obediently, telling myself boundaries were good and healthy. Now, standing alone in our living room with a stranger's warning still echoing in my head, I realized those weren't boundaries. They were walls built to keep me out, to keep me quiet, to keep me ignorant. My fingers hesitated on the handle for a moment. I didn't want to find anything. I wanted to open the drawer, see nothing but receipts and pens and old bills, and feel ridiculous for being paranoid. I wanted to believe the stranger's visit was a misunderstanding. I wanted to believe the man I loved was simply stressed, not hiding something that could hurt me. But when I pulled the drawer open, the first thing I saw was an envelope with my name on it. Not written neatly. Not lovingly. Scribbled. Rushed. Like someone wrote it only because they needed a label. My stomach tightened as I pulled it out. The paper felt heavy in my hands. Too heavy. I sat on the edge of the couch and slid the papers out carefully, afraid they might crumble if I moved too fast. Inside were documents I had never seen before. Forms. Contracts. Copies of bank statements. But the signatures, my signatures, weren't mine. My name was there, but the handwriting looked wrong. Too slanted, too sharp, too rushed. Like someone had practiced copying it enough to get close, but not enough to make it perfect. My hands went cold. I flipped through the pages, my breath catching with each one. My name was on things I didn't recognize, agreements, withdrawals, authorizations. All dated within the past few months. He had used my name. Without asking. Without telling me. Without caring. I pressed the papers against my chest, trying to steady my hands. My heart was beating too hard, too fast. A sick feeling crawled up my throat. The room began to feel too small, too dark. I swallowed repeatedly, but it didn't help. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to crumble to the floor. But mostly, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I felt angry. Not the kind of anger that explodes. The kind that burns slow, deep, steady. The kind that makes you see clearly for the first time. For years, I had made myself small to keep the peace. I had waited for him to choose kindness. I had ignored the feeling in my gut that whispered something was wrong. But now I had proof, not whispers, not hunches. Proof. I stood up, needing air. The room felt suffocating. I walked to the window, pushed it open, and let the cool breeze hit my face. It helped, but only a little. As I stared down at the quiet street below, something inside me shifted. A realization I didn't want but couldn't avoid. He hadn't told me to get out because of me. He'd told me to get out because something was coming. Something he didn't want me tangled in. Or worse, something he had already tangled me in. The papers trembled in my hands. My breath came out uneven. My chest felt tight with something sharp and hot. I wanted answers, but he wasn't home. He wasn't answering his phone. And the man who'd come earlier clearly knew more than he had said. I wanted to call him back, ask him what he meant, beg him to tell me everything, but I didn't even know his name. He hadn't introduced himself. He hadn't left a card. He had simply warned me and walked away. I looked back at the papers. My name stared up at me like a stranger. The forged signature felt like a slap. It wasn't just illegal. It was personal. Violating. A betrayal. So deep it almost made me dizzy. I took a deep breath and pressed the papers flat. I had to think. I had to decide what to do. Sitting still wasn't an option anymore. I grabbed my phone and started searching for anything, any bank accounts, any notifications, any emails I might have missed. But there was nothing. Everything he'd done, he'd kept hidden. Carefully. Intentionally. A cold shiver ran through me. I tried calling him again. Straight to voicemail. That silence felt louder than anything he'd ever yelled. Hours passed. I paced the living room until my legs ached. I kept checking the window, expecting him to appear at any moment, walk in with some excuse or half-truth. But as evening settled in, I realized something unsettling. He wasn't avoiding me. He was hiding. From them. From me. From everything he'd done. And I didn't know if he was coming back. Around 6 p.m., the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the living room. I stood in the middle of the room holding the envelope like it was a live wire. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too hollow, too dangerous. I kept hearing the stranger's warning replay in my head. Be careful. Of what? Of who? Of him? The moment the thought crossed my mind, I flinched. I didn't want to believe he could hurt me. Not intentionally. But the truth was colder than I wanted to face. He already had. There was a knock at the door. My entire body went stiff, breath catching in my throat. It was softer this time, hesitant. Not like the man from earlier. But that didn't make it better. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I slowly walked toward the door. I pressed my eye to the peephole. It wasn't him. It wasn't the stranger. It was his sister. My breath rushed out in a shaky exhale. I opened the door halfway, relief and dread mixing together. She stepped inside immediately, closing the door behind her. She looked worried, her eyebrows drawn tight, her hands twisting nervously. She didn't hug me or smile or even say hello. She just looked at me with wide, trembling eyes. "Where is he?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. He hasn't been home all day." She swallowed hard and looked around the room like she expected him to appear from the shadows. "Do you know what's going on?" I asked cautiously. She hesitated. A long, tense hesitation. Then she whispered, "No, but I know it's bad." Those words made the world tilt under my feet. I gripped the back of the couch to steady myself. "Why are you saying that?" I asked quietly. She looked at me with fear she couldn't hide. "Because he called me last night. He never calls that late." He sounded, she paused, searching for the right word. "Scared." I've never heard him like that. My breath hitched. "He said if anything happened, I should check on you." The room spun. I sat slowly because my knees were shaking too hard to trust. I clutched the envelope to my chest, unable to speak, unable to breathe. "He said your name," she continued, "over and over. Like he was trying to tell me something but couldn't." Tears stung my eyes. I didn't want to cry, not now, not in front of her. But the fear in her voice cracked something inside me. "Do you know who came here today?" I asked. She nodded once. Tight. Heavy. "He's not someone you want knocking on your door, Maya." My stomach twisted painfully. "What is he involved in?" I whispered, my voice barely holding together. She closed her eyes, shook her head. "I don't know everything, but I know he's been desperate lately. Making deals he shouldn't make. Owing people he shouldn't owe." My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "And he used your name," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "He told me he didn't want to, but he didn't see another way." Those words shattered me. I leaned forward, covering my face with my hands. A sob tore out of me before I could stop it. All the fear, all the betrayal, all the confusion poured out of me. My body shook, my breath coming out in ragged gasps. His sister sat beside me silently, her hand hovering like she wanted to comfort me, but didn't know how. It took me several minutes to breathe normally again. When I finally lifted my head, she looked at me with a mix of pity and regret. "You need to leave before he comes back," she whispered. I blinked, stunned. "Why?" She looked at me with eyes full of a truth she wished she didn't know. "Because he's not the same person anymore. And whatever he's caught in, you don't want to be standing next to him when it all falls apart." Her words hung in the room like thick smoke. I looked at the envelope again. The forged signatures. My name tied to things I never touched. The stranger's warning. His midnight phone call. The command to get out. And suddenly, everything connected. He wasn't protecting me. He was distancing me. Before they came, my body went cold. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. "I need to think," I whispered. She nodded, her expression heavy with worry. "Just please don't wait too long." She left quietly, closing the door behind her. The moment she was gone, the house felt different. Not like a home, like a threat, like a place I needed to escape. But as I stood there, staring at the door, one truth dug itself deep into my chest. If I didn't confront him soon, my silence would bury me. And for the first time in my life, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt the beginning of my voice. The moment his sister's footsteps faded down the hallway, the silence inside the apartment changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it was alert, listening, like the walls themselves knew something I didn't. I stood in the center of the living room holding the envelope, and for the first time since last night, I felt the weight of the truth settling into my bones. He hadn't protected me. He had prepared to lose me. That realization stung deeper than the betrayal itself. It meant he'd thought ahead, planned it, accepted it. And when he told me to get out, it wasn't a moment of anger or impulsiveness. It was intentional. A clean break. A way to shove me out of the blast radius of whatever he had stepped into. Only he didn't shove me far enough. My chest tightened. I took slow breaths, trying to stop the shaking in my hands. But my body already knew something my mind didn't want to accept. The danger wasn't coming. It was already here. I walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, and stared at my clothes hanging neatly in rows. All the dresses I wore to his family dinners, all the oversized sweaters I wore on the nights he came home too tired to talk, all the shoes I lined up perfectly because I thought order meant safety. I reached out and touched one sleeve, and a wave of grief moved through me so suddenly that I had to grip the closet door to steady my legs. This place had been my whole life for years. I had built routines around him, habits around him, silence around him. And now the very space I once called home felt like a stranger's house, a place I needed to escape before it could swallow me whole. But escaping meant answering a question I had been terrified to ask. Where would I go? I didn't have savings. I didn't have family nearby. I didn't have anyone I felt close enough to call and say, I'm scared. I'm in trouble. I need help. I had isolated myself without realizing it, choosing his comfort over my connections, his approval over my independence. And now it left me with nothing but a forged signature and a warning from a man who wouldn't even tell me his name. The thought made my throat tighten. I grabbed my small backpack from under the bed, the only bag I owned that wasn't overflowing with memories, and began placing a few essentials inside. My phone charger, a pair of jeans, 2 shirts, my toothbrush. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here waiting for him to return with whatever trouble he had dragged behind him. As I zipped the bag halfway, my phone buzzed.
My heart jumped.
For a fraction of a second, I hoped it was him, ready to tell me something, anything, that would make this whole nightmare make sense. But it wasn't him. It was an unknown number. I stared at the screen, frozen. The message preview showed only 3 words. Don't go anywhere. I shot through my veins. My breath went sharp and thin. I opened the message with trembling fingers. There was no name, no explanation. Just those 3 words repeated a second time, followed by a chilling final line. We're coming to talk. My pulse thudded painfully in my chest, each beat loud enough to drown out the world around me. I reread the message again and again, hoping I misunderstood. But the meaning was clear. Whoever had texted me wasn't asking. They were telling. They knew I was here. They knew I was alone. And they were already on their way. I backed away from the bed instinctively, my legs trembling. Every breath scraped against my throat. The envelope felt suddenly hot in my hand, like it was burning a hole through my palm. My mind raced. Call the police, run out the back door, hide, scream. But each idea crumbled as fast as it came. Then another message lit up the screen. Maya. They knew my name. My knees almost buckled. I pressed a hand against the wall to stop myself from sliding to the floor. Another message buzzed in. We just want what he owes. My breath stuttered. Not who.
What?
They didn't want him. They wanted something he had taken, promised, or failed to return, something they believed I had access to. I didn't. I had nothing. Not answers. Not information. Not money. Not leverage. Nothing. But they didn't know that. And they were coming anyway. My bag dangled from my shoulder as I stumbled back into the living room, grabbing my keys with shaking fingers. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to leave before they arrived. But as I reached the door, a sharp, jarring knock split the silence. Not a normal knock. Not polite. Not patient. The same kind of knock the stranger from earlier had used. My pulse stopped. For a moment, the world went completely still. I backed away from the door slowly, silently, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hand flew to my mouth to stop the sound of my breathing. Another knock. Harder this time. Maya, a voice called. Open the door. Not him. Not his sister. Not the stranger from earlier. A new voice.
Deep.
Controlling. Impatient. I swallowed a scream. They were here. I took 3 steps back, then 4, clutching the envelope so tightly it crumpled in my fist. The knocking grew louder, angrier. "We know you're in there." My eyes darted around the room. Windows, hallway, balcony, anything. But everything felt too exposed, too loud, too slow. Panic tightened around my ribs like a fist. Then, suddenly, silence. No more knocks. No voices. No footsteps. Just quiet. The kind that made your skin prickle. I tiptoed toward the peephole, each step trembling, my breath held so tightly that my chest burned. When I pressed my eye to the glass, my stomach lurched violently. There were 2 men in the hallway, both facing the door, both waiting. The taller one leaned forward slightly, as if he could sense my presence even through the wood. The shorter one was tapping his fingers against his thigh, restless, impatient. Neither looked like they had come to talk. My hand clamped over my mouth as fear surged through me. I backed away from the door slowly, careful not to make a sound, careful not to let the floor creak. I reached the bedroom and closed the door gently, my lungs burning for air. My mind raced so fast it felt like I was drowning in thoughts. Run, hide, scream, call someone. But one thought cut through the chaos. I needed to get out.
Right now.
Quietly.
Fast.
I grabbed my phone and typed out a text with shaking hands, not to him, but to the only person who might know something he hadn't told me. His sister. "They're here." I hit send. Seconds later, her reply appeared. "Maya, listen carefully. Leave now. Go out the back. Don't speak to them. Don't let them see you. I'm coming to you." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I dropped my phone into my pocket, grabbed my bag, and slipped into the narrow hallway leading to the back stairwell, the one he always said was only for emergencies. This was an emergency. I turned the handle slowly, praying it wouldn't squeak. It didn't. The door opened into the dim stairwell, cold air rushing over my skin like a warning. I took the first step down, then the second, then the third. But before I reached the fourth, a voice echoed from above me, faint, but unmistakable. "Maya?" Not the men, not his sister, not the stranger. A new voice, a familiar voice, a voice I had tried so hard to forget. I froze, one foot on the step, one hand gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles hurt. I turned slowly. He was standing at the top of the stairs, his face pale, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes wild in a way I had never seen before. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked like he hadn't breathed. He looked like he had run through hell to reach me. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please don't go." The stairwell spun. My breath caught, and everything I thought I knew about him, about us, about this nightmare, shifted. I kept staring at the closed door even after he left, as if the wood was supposed to answer the questions burning inside me. For a long moment, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, feeling the weight of that bag on my lap and the heavier weight of the truth pressing against my ribs. When I finally managed to stand, my legs felt weak, like they didn't belong to me. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I knew the second I tried to explain what was happening, my voice would collapse under me. I walked back into the house quietly, almost tiptoeing, as though my silence would keep me invisible. He was in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened, like another man with a leather bag hadn't just threatened to unravel everything I thought I had. The smell of the coffee made my stomach twist. My hands trembled as I set the bag on the table, but I didn't open it. I couldn't.
Not yet.
He glanced at me over his shoulder, no shock, no guilt, not even curiosity on his face. Just that same tired indifference he wore like a second skin. "Did he leave?" he asked, as if the man had been a delivery guy dropping off a package. I nodded, unable to form words. My throat felt like it was closing. He didn't ask who the man was, or what he wanted, or why I looked like I'd just seen the inside of a nightmare. He didn't care. And somehow, that hurt more than anything the man had said outside. I waited for him to say something. Anything that would hint at a hidden panic, a secret fear, a confession begging to break free. But all he did was stir sugar into his cup, sip it, and sit at the dining table with a bored exhale. I realized then that silence wasn't his shield. It was his weapon. He used it to minimize everything, to make me doubt myself, to make me feel dramatic for things that should have been taken seriously. I walked to the sink, filling a glass with water to pretend I was okay. But when I lifted it, my hand shook so violently that a little spilled, dripping onto the counter, and then onto my shirt. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. I felt his eyes on me, not with concern, but with annoyance. "What?" he muttered. I forced my breathing to slow. "Who was that man?" I finally whispered. He shrugged. Like the question was a mosquito he didn't feel like swatting. "Someone I used to know."
Don't worry about it.
I stared at him, stunned. "Don't worry about it?" I repeated softly, disbelieving how easy those words came from him. My voice trembled, but I kept it low.
He threatened you.
"He told me to give you a message." I said, "Don't worry about it." He snapped sharply, his tone slicing through the air. He didn't raise his voice often, but when he did, it felt like a blade brushing my skin without breaking it. I stepped back instinctively, and he noticed. That slight recoil, that tiny movement, made something in his face shift. For a moment, he looked almost satisfied. That's when it dawned on me in a painful, quiet flash. He liked the power he had over me. My fear wasn't a warning sign to him. It was reassurance. I tightened my fingers around the edge of the counter. A steady heat began rising in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but something older, something buried, self-preservation. He stood and took his coffee to the living room, turning on the TV with that careless thumb click that always felt smug. The house filled once again with the sound of voices and static, drowning out the crackling quiet between us. I stayed in the kitchen, breathing shallow. The bag was still on the table, like a living thing waiting for me to touch it. I reached for it slowly, hesitating as though opening it would commit me to a truth I wasn't ready for. But curiosity, no, fear won. Inside were papers, envelopes, photographs. My heart lurched as I removed each item carefully. Some of the documents weren't in English. Others were. And the more I unfolded, the more the air tightened around me. Names I didn't recognize. Dates that didn't align with the stories he had told me. Places he said he'd never been. And then something worse. A photo of him, standing with the man who had shown up at our door, arm around his shoulder,
smiling.
The glass of water slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. My body jolted at the sound, and his voice echoed from the living room, irritated. "What did you break now?"
Break.
That word. I felt something inside me cracking farther than a glass ever could. I sank to my knees to pick up the pieces, but instead, I froze there, gripping the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing completely. Because at that moment, I knew the truth wasn't something waiting to hit me later. It was already here. And the real story, the one buried beneath everything I had ignored, was just beginning to surface. When I finally forced myself to stand again, I wiped my hands on my jeans, opened the second envelope, and found something that made my heart plummet so sharply I had to grip the table again to stay upright. A letter, addressed to me, written by the man who had shown up. But it wasn't the words that terrified me. It was the date at the top. It was written 2 months before I ever met my partner. My vision blurred, my pulse hammered. I felt the room tilt. And yet, the shocking part wasn't that this man had written me something before I even knew he existed. The shocking part was the first line. I told him, "He can't hide you forever." My breath caught. Hide me? Hide me from who? Or hide me for what? I didn't know yet. But something deep in my bones whispered that whatever I thought I knew about my life was about to be rewritten completely. And this time, silence wasn't going to protect me. Not anymore. I didn't move for a long time. The letter trembled in my hand, the words blurring as though my eyes didn't want to let them exist. Hide you forever. I kept rereading that line, hoping it would rearrange itself into something harmless, something logical, something that wouldn't make my stomach tighten like a fist. But the letters stayed the same. Sharp. Intentional. Personal. A wave of cold swept over me, so sudden it felt like someone had opened a window I didn't know existed. My palms dampened, my throat tightened, and for a moment, I felt like I was standing somewhere far away from my own body. I had the instinct to run again. Not out the door this time, but from the truth. But I was past running. I could feel it, the shift inside me. The quiet woman who had swallowed everything was gone. Something else was rising in her place. I swallowed hard and forced myself to read the next lines. The man's handwriting was rough, hurried, like he'd written it while watching over his shoulder. You don't know me, but you will. I've kept my distance because I had to, because he made me, because he made all of us. But this ends soon. When you find this letter, you'll understand that everything he told you about his past, everything, was built to keep you from discovering who you really are to him.
A chill climbed up my spine. Who I really am to him.
I dropped into the chair like my legs had given up. The house felt too small, the walls too close. The TV hummed in the next room, steady and unchanged, a mocking soundtrack to the unraveling of my life. I glanced toward the living room. He was still there, still sipping his coffee, still pretending the world was as flat and simple as he wanted it to be. And suddenly, the air between us felt poisoned. Everything I had ignored, every strange moment, every unexplained outburst, every sudden trip he never elaborated on, came rushing back. I looked down at the letter again, my fingers gripping the edges tightly. You don't know what he's capable of, it continued. He doesn't want you to remember her. And he definitely doesn't want you to know what he did that night. I'm writing this because you deserve the truth. You deserved it years ago. Remember her? Who? My pulse thudded painfully. I flipped through the other documents in the bag. Receipts, photographs from cities I had never heard him mention, passports with stamps from places he claimed he'd never been. And then something slipped out from between two folders and fell onto the table with a soft tap. A photograph. Not a recent one. Older. Maybe 10 years old. I picked it up slowly, bracing myself without knowing why. It was a woman. Dark hair. A soft smile. Eyes that looked strangely familiar. My breath caught as I leaned closer. I felt something tug inside me, a strange recognition I couldn't place. Not quite déjà vu, something deeper. But the shock wasn't the woman. It was who she was holding. A little girl. No more than 4 or 5. Black hair. Big eyes. A floral dress. And she looked like me. My fingers loosened, almost dropping the photo. My vision blurred at the edges as I stared at that little girl's face. Questions slammed into me all at once. I didn't have a photo like this. My childhood pictures looked different. My mother never had that hairstyle.
My father never smiled like that.
And yet, everything about the child in the picture pulled at a place inside me I had never touched before. The name written on the back made my breath stop. It wasn't my name, but it felt like it should have been. A sudden thud from the living room jolted me. My heart jumped into my throat. He had dropped the remote. Everything okay in there? He called casually. I pressed the photo to my chest, swallowing a tremor.
My voice came out thin, forced.
Yeah, I'm fine. I wasn't fine, because something inside me was shifting rapidly, breaking open like a fault line. Something I thought I knew about myself, about my life, my past, my identity, felt suddenly unstable. I picked up the letter again, scanning for more answers, more clues, more anything. But the next part wasn't an answer. It was a warning. He won't let this go. Not this time. If he senses you found out, he'll act like he always does, calm, gentle, dismissive. But don't believe it. He's dangerous when he feels cornered. My throat tightened. Dangerous. I lifted my eyes slowly and looked toward the living room. He was sitting on the couch, leaning back comfortably, the soft glow of the TV lighting his face. To anyone else, he'd look harmless. Quiet. Even kind. But I wasn't anyone else anymore. I looked back at the letter. I'll come back for you when it's time. You won't be alone in this. We've all been waiting for the moment you would wake up to the truth. When you're ready, I'll tell you everything. Until then, be careful. My hands shook. The letter slipped from my fingers and drifted onto the table. A cold certainty settled inside me. The man wasn't lying. The photographs weren't fake. The documents weren't meaningless. And the worst part? He, my boyfriend, the man in the living room, wasn't surprised by any of it. He wasn't confused. He wasn't panicked. He was waiting for me to say something, waiting to see how much I knew, waiting to decide what to do next. I stood slowly, the photo still clutched in my hand. My legs felt heavy, but steady. Fear and clarity burned together inside me, a painful, necessary fire. Because for the first time since this all began, I realized I wasn't the one he needed to be afraid of. Not anymore.